I do want to address what you do have coming out, which I know literally the planet Earth is waiting to see, which is Wakanda Forever. And again, the use of, I mean, I know that Marvel, it seems like everybody works with Marvel. They all talk about, yes, there's a visual design department that starts these things before anybody comes to work on them. But your work on Black Panther first was the use of color and fabric. Everybody looked just fantastic in that film. I mean, just the look of it all was unbelievable. And while you've talked about it before, so I don't want to be redundant because I want to ask about Wakanda Forever. But when you went into Wakanda Forever, obviously we had everyone, I mean, you knew Chad Boseman, and the man was a warrior, and he faced the end of his life. I mean, one of his last performances in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom was ferocious. I can't imagine what it was like to have lost him. And we all, an artist that had such a great life, but up until the very end, he never stopped giving his all. I mean, from Get On Up to Wakanda Forever to Ma Rainey's Black Bottom and everything he did in between, the guy was an incredible actor. Yeah. But I can't imagine, what was it like to then have to go back and do Wakanda Forever? I can't imagine that could have been an easy thing to do.
Well, no, it wasn't. And anytime you do a film that large, it's never easy, even in the best of circumstances. And we had the worst of circumstances. We lost our beloved Chadwick. It's still very difficult for me to talk about that time without getting emotional. We did this film in the middle of COVID. Yeah. We were Zoom calling each other. We weren't hugging each other, embracing each other when we suffered that loss. But I think the circumstances surrounding having to muscle through a pandemic and repair from a great loss, mourn, be a family collectively, became a part of the passion of the journey to create something that not only you would be proud of, that he would be proud of. And that's, probably what the intent was, the purpose was for all of us when we thought about how to enhance the film. And, just to, go through the process a little bit, Marvel does have a visual development department. I'm a part of that. My team is a part of that. It's not separate from the costume design process. We analyze, we look at everything together. We throw out suggestions. It's a very open forum. It's a very collaborative medium. Wakanda Forever is so huge.
Yeah.
It is not the brainchild of one individual artist. It's the collective. And once these images are decided on, whether they're mine or Meinerding, his team, my team, we're all the same team. And we gather them and then we create them. And that process also involves a design element, which is choosing fabrics and colors, machines and surface textures and beads. And it goes on for weeks and weeks. And in the end, you have created something that's not 2D, it's 3D. And there's a design element to 3D. There's a person involved. There's an actor involved. And so this process is massive. And, no one person can say, like in that game show To Tell the Truth, right. There's no one person standing. Our leader is Ryan Coogler, and he's the final say. He's the final decision maker at many stages of the process. And he's very adept at explaining what he wants. So we're all on a mission to create this beautiful tableau that we can all say tells one story. And our storyteller is the writer and director.
Absolutely.
So I love that we can work together. And I think that's what makes these films look as good as they do.
Oh,
Because
absolutely.
if I wanted to put a grasshopper in the middle of the scene, it may not happen. So,
Well, one of the again, what I loved about your work in the first Black Panther was it was such a logical extension of your entire career in terms of the way you use color to define character and the way you use fabric that held the colors. Now,
mm,
one of the things that I've been looking at and seeing for Wakanda Forever, which I'm dying to see, is not only you created Wakanda as a living, breathing nation state. Every costume told a story, not just
mhm.
with the character on screen, but about like M'Baku's his realm, and
Yeah,
the Dora Milaje, the way they had trained and the way they moved and everything. But now with
yeah.
Wakanda Forever, you had to create a whole new nation state. You had to
Mhm,
create the Talocan Empire, which,
mhm,
again, rather than going to something like you've got the whole African history and then the future
mhm,
Afrofuturism, you had to go
mhm.
back to an entirely different culture.
Yes.
What was that like for you?
Well, as I said, we all pitch in with ideas and we work very closely with historians and we have access to them at any time. I had a very strong ACD crew that continued to pose the questions
Mm,
to the historians, that they were excited to inform us that one thing might have been Aztec instead of Mayan. They helped us understand that we were being inspired by the Mayan, the Mesoamerican culture and post-classic times, and that how would this underwater world exist with their cousins above ground?
right,
And the elements of the sea, what would they use to live and would they clothe themselves? I mean, we worked with free divers that had to move and breathe underwater, and so it was very challenging to come up with the look that embodied not only a very ancient culture, and to honor it, but also use the elements of the ocean. So we looked at fish and coral and kelp, and we used that as our fabric story to how they would honor the fallen fish with the bones, or
right.
how they would mimic the fins of a beautiful lionfish. And at that point, I had to decide, where we would go and have these things made. And fortunately, I was able to work with some of the most talented artisans in the world,
Right.
to create the Tolocan, to create the new Black Panther costume, to create the Dora Milaje's upgraded armor. I worked locally, I worked internationally, and everyone had their task. So, through hundreds of Zoom calls and videos and samples that were sent to me, we were able to compartmentalize everything and get it done.
Were there, because color has been so important to you and in your work, did you look at the Talocans as having an entirely different color palette that you could use? So when you had the Wakandans on screen with people from the Talocan civilization, that they would bounce off each other and contrast on screen? Was that something you were consciously trying to do?
Well, when you look at the Dresden Kodak, you kind of get a sense of the Mayan culture. When you look at the pottery, you get a sense of the pageantry. When you read about the elements that they use, the spondylus shells, when you look at the wapiles and vegetable dyes and things that they might have used, the color palette does come alive.
Right.
And and the way you combine it, and, very different than African culture. And also because we were in the ocean, so we had kelp. We also had to come up with our form of vibranium, and that was, on something that was undersea, and we were able to do a series of resin molds, and we presented greens and blues, and there was a process of putting metallic flakes in the resin to have a glitter effect that we did in layers to present. And all of this was presented on Zoom to Marvel and to Ryan Coogler. And then we found what we considered was the Talocan jade, which was a beautiful blue jade. And from there, we use a lot of that and a lot of gold. So we wanted to explore the pageantry of the Mesoamerican culture, but not the Aztec, because the Aztec was a much bigger civilization than the small community of Mayans that we were inspired by.